Alright guys, so another book review. I've been pretty positive, I would say, about the ones up until now, and I'm not going full negative here, but I have a lot of thoughts. We'll just say that to start. So today we have Moby Dick. So I'm gonna start off by saying I'm glad I read this book. But there are a lot of strings attached to that statement. So am I glad I read this book? Absolutely. Would I ever read it again? 0% chance. Would I recommend it to somebody else? Only if they are personally motivated. I wouldn't recommend this to somebody who's unsure. I wouldn't recommend this to somebody who is just wanting to read something old, feel, I don't know, branch out a little bit culturally. This isn't the one for that because it is tough to get through. I'm going to take a sip of water because we've got a lot to say. All right. Overall, this book was a good experience. Not even fully because of the book, but partially just because I'm proud of myself for finishing it. I'm happy that I can say I read the whole thing, but there are ways this could have been a better experience. So something I'll touch on really quickly, just because I mentioned it in a previous review, is that I usually try to get special, like, cool editions of books. This is one that I bought a long time ago. I've had this copy for a hot minute. It's from, I believe it's just from Barnes & Noble, like their classic edition, whatever. It's nothing fancy. This was a very cheap copy. I'm not mad about it. I do wish I'd gotten a cooler one. I found some cooler ones, but I'd already purchased this one at the time. And I typically don't purchase multiple copies of the same book. So my cat is going to knock over the camera. I'm gonna grab her if you want a little look-see. Oh, this is Percy. I love her. She, oh, hi baby. Apparently wants to hang out. She'll run away in a moment, I'm sure. So let's get into it. Here is my #1 biggest gripe with this book. There are chapters in this book where good old Herman Melville just goes on tangents about, like, literally anything. I feel like I took a biology course while reading this book. He gives in-depth descriptions about the anatomy of different types of whales, about the industry, which I found the stuff about the whaling industry to actually be very interesting. So they're hit and miss. If it's something that interests you, or you're kind of like, oh, that's, you know, I would have never learned that otherwise, that's kind of neat, then some of them aren't that bad. But others, he has an entire chapter explaining how to tie different types of knots, which, if you're interested in tying knots, might be the chapter for you. But for me personally, I'm not. And even if I was, I would need illustrations, not him just talking about how you make loops and then they go through different ways and this one's good for X, Y, and Z, but I don't even really know what he's talking about. That chapter is rough, as is my personal favorite, sarcasm fully intended, which is basically I think it was like 6 pages or so, essentially encyclopedia entry explaining the different types of whales, the names for the types, where the names came from. Most of it's anecdotal. It's not actually like, here's scientific info. It's him being like, oh, well, this man went sailing on the sea and he saw it under this circumstance and he named it this, but we don't know if it's also this other thing that this other guy saw sailing on the sea. Like, it's rambly, worse so than me, which is impressive. There's just a lot happening on that front. So I didn't love those. And the thing is, they're not, if it was few and far between, then maybe they're pretty frequent. There are a lot of them. So I started this book out, the first, I don't know, like 5th, 6th of the book, I really enjoyed. And I didn't expect to. Similar to Pride and Prejudice, which I've already reviewed. I'll leave the link down below. I went into it expecting it to be dull and hard to get through and slow. And the first bit of this book was not like that at all. It actually moved pretty quickly. I thought it was interesting. It was kind of like setting the mood. He wasn't on Nantucket yet. It was his trip basically from where he started to get to the island and then find a ship. And that whole part was really interesting to me. I found it engaging. It was easy to read. I went through it pretty quickly. It's once he gets onto the boat, which is the majority of the book, which you would expect. It is a book about Moby Dick, the whale that they are hunting in their whaling boat. So this isn't a surprise. But it also wasn't the most welcome. They got onto the boat and I thought, okay, cool, things are gonna get even more like exciting, stuff's gonna happen, this is gonna be great. And it didn't. Which I'm sure is just a reflection of the way it actually would be. It wouldn't be this exciting thing all the time. There's a lot of time you would spend on the boat just sailing. I mean, just going from point A to point B to where the whales might even be at, and then you have to wait and wait and wait until you actually spot them, and then it has to be the right type of whale before you like go for it. There's a lot involved and I get that, but I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to read about them sailing day after day after day and looking out over that great ocean and seeing ocean. It gets tiresome. And that's kind of the source of these ramblings. It goes from the story that is going somewhere. He has this idea, he's gonna go on this trip, he's gonna go whaling, and it's gonna be exciting, and they're gonna catch one, and they're gonna make all this money, and it'll be so cool, and you have these new characters that are interesting. You have the captain, you don't really know much about, he's a little mysterious. And then the longer it goes on, all the mystery drops away, and you're left with a crew of people, most of which that don't really have their own story, on a boat together, day in, day out, with nothing happening. So, I guess do with that what you will. There are some really well-written parts. It felt like an accomplishment to finish the book, which I was happy about. I enjoyed it overall. I would have loved this book if someone had given me a list of chapters that you could skip. Kind of like skipping the filler episodes in a TV show. Basically, here are all the chapters that move the story forward, that create character development, that things happen in. Here are all the ones you can skip. And if I would have had that list, I'm sure someone has made that online, because I know I'm not the only one who feels this way, then I think it would have been a really good book. I think there's a lot of good to be said for the book when it is good. There's just so much filler and other stuff, and it is thick, fellas. This is a thick book. That it's hard to praise what was done well without going off on tangents about what went wrong. So, with all of that being said, if you have personal motivation to read this book, if it's particularly interesting to you, if you find stories about adventure and whaling interesting, then I think you should give it a try, but know that it's not going to be the not even close to the easiest read. It's not even going to be like middle of the road. It's gonna be difficult, and if you aren't internally motivated, if you yourself don't want to read it and like want to experience the story, then it's not going to be enjoyable for you. But with that being said, if you're somebody who has always found it interesting, who has a love for literature and really enjoys kind of delving into these older books, then you might love it. You might truly enjoy it. And there are some cool things in here. There was a little bit of political commentary within this book that is so relevant today that I stopped and I made my boyfriend read the chapter because I was like, you need to look at this. He has a chapter in here talking about meat consumption and how it isn't necessary and they could all go vegetarian and be better off. And I'm not speaking to any like aside right now, but that is a actual argument that is still super, super relevant today. There are a ton of people going vegan and vegetarian, and I read it and I was like, it doesn't matter how you feel about the topic. This is old, friends, okay? This is old, and it is so relevant in some of these ways. There's also the hints at a homosexual relationship within it, which was incredibly taboo at the time. And you read it now and it's like, okay, Herman Melville, okay, I see you. Like, he's still relevant with a lot of the topics that are breached today. So if you are interested in that sort of thing, if it gets you excited to kind of see the way that history is still relevant today, then there might be some good stuff in here for you. But like I said, I personally struggled with it so much that I don't know that I could ever like wholeheartedly recommend it to somebody if they themselves didn't have that motivation to read it already, like independent of anything that I say. So with that being said, given that I did enjoy it overall, and I'm glad I read it, but there's so many strings attached to those statements, I'm only gonna rate it a 4.5 out of 10. I know it's a classic. I know it is famous for a reason, but as somebody in the current day, that's what I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna stand by it, so please don't come for me if you love it. And please ignore my cat. Wow. Hi, Percy. And we are going to sign off with that. All right. She wants on my shoulder. Bye, guys.